So welcome. In this video I want to address the question, what is enlightenment and why is it important? Do I even want enlightenment? Recently I've having more and more discussions like this with people, students, friends. So let's look into this. And what became clear to me is that there seems to be this idea that or people have the idea that enlightenment is some kind of perfect state, some kind of perfect being, and if I get enlightened that I can't have a normal life anymore. And that's not at all how I see it. So let's explore that in this video. And I'm gonna talk about levels of consciousness, and I want to talk about different masters to give you an example that there is not just one flavor of enlightenment. Enlightenment can be lots of different things. And I'll share some own experiences. So, starting off with going really back, when you start a spiritual journey, that often happens because there's some kind of crisis in your life. It can happen because you get ill, or you lose your job, or a relationship, midlife crisis. Often for people there comes a point in their life when something big happens and they start to question, okay, what do I want with this life? Why am I here? What is life for? What's the purpose of it all? What's the meaning of it all? And that becomes a spiritual quest. Now, really, what's under that is that we, very fundamental, we all want to be happy. We want to live a happy life, and we want to live a meaningful life. So, what is going to give us happiness? So one model that can define that in a bit, to chart that for us, is something called Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is like a pyramid. I'll put it on the screen. And Abraham Maslow is an American psychologist. In 1943 he came up with this. And he finds different levels that are first needs that we need to get met is physiological. Breathing, food, water, sleep, etc. Then we go to safety, you go up to love and belonging, esteem, and totally at the top you're going to get self-actualization, fulfilling your potential, finding purpose and meaning in life. So you go higher and higher up. Enlightenment is not on that chart. But in terms of, from a point of view of psychology, that is pretty much valid. So when I start to think about happiness, this idea we want to have a happy life, what gives us that happiness? And this is where a level of consciousness come in. So there are 7 levels of consciousness that I want to present. It's roughly based on the chakra system. So on the first level, base chakra is security. This is all about being safe, having a house, having food, having shelter, having safety. And you can see this when there's a war and people's homes gets attacked. They need to flee the country. Now they're all they care about is survival and safety. So their thinking is that if I can just be safe, then I'll be happy. When you've lost everything, you go right back to that basic level. They're not interested in enlightenment or going on a holiday. All they want is to be safe. If they can just be safe, if they can have some kind of home and food and shelter and clothes and can be warm, then they'll be so happy. So that's the first level. Once that gets established, then after some time, then hey, there's more than that. Now I've got this. And then you start looking around you and you see people enjoying life, having pleasurable sensations, pleasurable experience. So I want that. That will bring me happiness. So then we get into pleasure, second chakra. So nice food, nice holidays, things like this. So this is what you see on Instagram, on TikTok. Look at me having this fantastic life. I'm in this beautiful place. Oh, holiday to Spain is not good enough anymore. I need to go to the Maldives. Look at the color of the water. More and more and more. So this already, that level, people can get stuck on your whole life easily. Chasing the next sensation, the next beautiful thing. It needs to be even more beautiful, more pleasurable. People can get really addicted. This is where people get addicted to alcohol or drugs or sex. Sex is maybe the ultimate drug. Then a next level of development is power. Is this idea that, yeah, okay, everybody can book holidays to the Maldives, but I want to be more powerful. I want to be better than the rest, bigger, better. I want to have a bigger house, a better car, more money, more prestige. And then you end up with somebody like Donald Trump. I want to be president of the United States. We're going to make America the greatest country again, and this kind of thinking. It's really nice when you see this, once you learn these levels of consciousness, it's so easy to see where people are. So Donald Trump is totally motivated by power and by safety. Let's build a wall with Mexico and keep these people out. They are bad, we need to keep America safe. Safety and power, that's what motivates him. And especially the power the ego plays is not very pretty. It's hierarchy, it's control, dominating others. Earth has been on that level for such a long time. And rightly so, people are fighting to break down those hierarchy structures. So then the third chakra, solar plexus, power. Going up, then we move to love. This is, the spiritual community, it's all about love, right? We're rejecting the power, that's bad. It's all about love. And it's about it's about loving others, but most of all, learning to love yourself. And that's the hard job. To shift your consciousness from power to love, that's the hardest shift. I always say this is like, you have to go over this bridge. It really takes time because ego is there. So this idea that you hear a lot about in spiritual circles, you need to let go of the ego needs to be destroyed. Well, you need ego to function, but yeah, it's about making the ego a bit smaller, I would say, and coming into your heart, going from the mind, ego is mind, going from the mind to the heart. And this love consciousness. Very hard to do, and that's going to take time for humanity to get there. Because as an individual, you keep going up and down between these states. It's not like plunk, now you're there and you never go back down and the ego is gone. You're going to be in and out of that state for a long time until the love state becomes more established. And of course, heart is love, mind is fear. That could be a whole video in itself. But it's love opposite fear, and you need to let go of the fears to get to love, and etc. So it's quite a journey. This can take a lifetime. Then moving up, the more you get into a state of love, and you have that love in your life, and you will operate from that place. If you truly love yourself, you will want to express yourself. And then we go to the throat chakra. So this becomes about expressing, self-expression, really being you, becoming true to yourself, really doing what you want to do, what you want to create in the world. What gifts do you have? What's your contribution to society? Self-expression. But there's also a shift on the consciousness level connected to seeing the world as a friendly place, where the world is a beautiful place, where the world is perfect. You're not fighting against the world anymore. The world is not this bad place. No, the world is beautiful. And only from that state can you actually express freely. So this whole movement is to, all the time, is into more love, more freedom, more open. Really becoming more of your true self. So here you can see that at that point you start to go into non-duality state already. Beyond thinking that the world is bad or good. The world is everything. But the world is perfect as it is. And with that is a level of peace and acceptance that happens, a relaxation that happens. You're not having to fight anymore, and you can create freely. Then going up, the next level of consciousness, you become like the observer. You're observing yourself operating in the world. This is like, I'm not my body, I'm not my emotions, I'm not my thoughts, this kind of thinking. You become aware of the observer, and you get more and more identified with that observer aspect within yourself. Sixth chakra. And then ultimately, crown chakras, level 7, this is where you become cosmic awareness. You become one with the whole universe. Everything is one. This statement, that a lot of people make, we are all one. I always have to laugh. It's like, yeah, it's great, but is that really your direct experience? It comes from the enlightened masters who have really gone to that level. That's enlightenment, where the self dissolves in the unity state. At that point, persona more or less disappears. At that point, when that becomes your actual reality, that's when we are all one. So those are the 7 levels of consciousness. So there's this kind of natural progression all the time. More love, more freedom, more open. Letting go of the conditioning, being totally yourself. So by the time you get, I would say, well, once you get to the 5th level, then you get to a really good place where there will be so much happiness and joy and freedom and love. You are there. You don't need to go to an full enlightenment to be happy. But you haven't totally you won't be totally in a permanent state of freedom, out of suffering. But yeah, there's no need to go to full enlightenment. You can perfectly, if you can get there, wow, that's already amazing achievement. So what is this full enlightenment? Looking into that a little bit more. The definitions of that, and from a Buddhist point of view, that's where I'm coming from. I teach Tibetan Tantra, Buddhism, which is an incredibly powerful method to rapidly transform your consciousness. Ultimately, it will take you to full enlightenment. And that can happen within this life. So, enlightenment in the Buddhist teachings, the most simple way to define that is no more suffering. The end of suffering is enlightenment. And in fact, the whole Buddhist teachings came from Siddhartha Gautama, the person who we call the Buddha. He grew up in a palace, never left the palace. When he finally, in his 20s, when he left the palace and he came outside in the world, he saw there was a lot of suffering. People were sick, they were poor, aging, a lot of suffering. And he was so shocked that he left the palace on a quest to find a solution to suffering. How can we end suffering? That became his quest. So it's very apt that in Buddhism the definition of enlightenment is no more suffering. That makes perfect sense. And in a way, it's a perfect pointer. All these definitions are pointers to a state. No more suffering. So what does it mean not to suffer? So In Buddhism, they really study suffering, which is heavy, can be very heavy when you read that stuff. Initially, when I found Buddhism and I started reading books, I found it so heavy, all this talk about suffering. In my own words, I always explain suffering as the gap between how you want something to be and the reality. So, if there's a gap, there is a suffering. So let's say you fall in love with somebody. And initially that can be like a sweet suffering, because you are dreaming, you hope that they will love you too, and you can be together, and you fantasize about it, and it's kind of, there's tension there, there's a kind of a sweet suffering. But then if you realize you ask this person out and you get rejected, now the suffering becomes real, because you want to be with them, you're in love with them, you really want to be with them, but they don't want to be with you. There's a gap, and that's the suffering. Now, the mind can get really obsessive about they can't let it go, they can't let go of the idea of wanting to be with them, and they start stalking them, and it gets crazy. So much suffering. Only when you come back to reality, when you accept that it's not going to happen, that's where acceptance comes in. When you accept that, no, okay, they're not in love with me, I'm not going to be to them, and you let go of the dream. You accept reality, you come back to reality, and then the suffering stops. So, in Buddhist terms, we call this letting go of desires and attachments. Attachment is the same thing. It's my wife, my husband, my partner. And if they leave, because they decide, no, I want to move on, I want to be with somebody else, or I want to be on my own, I don't want to be in this relationship anymore. There's the attachment, and some people they can't accept it. The only way out of that suffering is to accept. Very simple. So letting go of attachment and desire is the ultimate way to get there. Easier said than done, it's not so simple. In Sutra, which is the Buddhist mind training, the classical Buddhist philosophy, the ideas working with the mind, all that is what we call Sutra. The highest insight in Sutra is emptiness. The idea that nothing exists outside of your own mind. Your house is not inherently existent. Without you there would not be a house. Without you there would not be a car. And give it enough time, if you stop caring for this house, it will fall back down to dust again. It's not real, alive by itself. But we hold on to these things as if they are real. So the more you, and that's quite a deep insight, I'm not going to go fully into this here, but ultimately when you meditate on reality, you come to realize that the whole of reality is created by the mind. It's not real, it's an illusion. And once you get to that insight, then the attachment just falls away. And then you're there. If there's no attachment, there's no suffering, you are free. End of suffering. So all that is Sutra. In Tantra, we work with energies rather than the mind, which is, because it's very hard, this mind training can take many, many lifetimes to really get there. With Tantra, you work with energies. When you transform your energy in your body, you transform the mind. That's why it can, because you bypass the logical mind, the mind is the biggest block. So that enables you to actually get there in a really relatively short amount of time. The highest insight of Tantra is bliss. Bliss state. And you hear about this a lot from Enlightenment, bliss state. Now and it seems polar opposite to emptiness. And I've had a deep enlightenment experience where first I was completely in a state of emptiness. 2 weeks later I was completely in a state of bliss. Really strong. Now in Buddhism teaches us that once the final insight in the whole journey is when that bliss equals emptiness. Emptiness is bliss. When that becomes an actual direct experience, then you reach what they say, stage of no more learning. I love that name, no more learning. You've become fully Buddha. So I'm not there yet, okay? I'm not claiming to be fully enlightened. I've got good days, I've got bad days, but I'm not Buddha. So that's looking at that theory of enlightenment from a Buddhist point of view. But you can see that in discussing those levels of consciousness, that things like unity, we are all one, self-expression, self-actualization, dissolving the ego, all these things that you have heard around enlightenment, all gets explained there. Emptiness, bliss, I hope that's a bit clearer. So what happens when you get enlightened, and what does that look like? So let's look at some masters. And I'm going to just go here on my own, not direct experience, but the people I've researched. I did a lot of research into enlightenment and trying to understand this. And there was a time when I was really questioning, was this person really enlightened, yes or no? And this is, I think, a question a lot of people have. So take somebody like Krishnamurti, for example. Krishnamurti was found by the Theosophical Society. They groomed him to be the new world teacher, the next Jesus, let's say. He was going to be the one to unite all religions in their view. And he didn't do that. He completely walked away from the whole organization and said, I don't want to be anybody's guru. Truth is a pathless land and only you can find it for yourself. And he broke away from all that structure. He threw away the whole hierarchy and he was acting solo, speaking about the state he was in. Now, very brave step to do. I mean, how many people would do that? When you've got millions to your disposal in terms of properties and goods and followers, like 100,000, to then throw it all away. Very amazing. Now his teaching is all about understanding the mind, and he's so sharp. But he's not fluffy and super loving. He can come across like quite cold and hard. It's this, I call it the sword of truth. He's got such a penetrating, fierce insight. So direct. I haven't come across anybody else. Osho lived in the same time, and even Osho said about Krishnamurti, although from the outside they seem to be the polar opposite, like enemies. They weren't enemies. Osho absolutely loved Krishnamurti. He even said in one of his talks that he's the sharpest mind that there is on the planet, and the day when he dies it will be a great loss for the world, because there's nobody else like him. So, Krishnamurti, amazing. If you are interested, get this book, Freedom from the Known. Freedom from the Known, it's only this thick. But it's so deep. When I started reading that years ago, I could only read like one page, and often I would have to go back to a paragraph and go like, sorry, what? Because he got so sharp, so deeply, that he challenges all your belief systems and really makes you think. Amazing. Well, I've mentioned the name Osho, so then you've got an Osho. Completely different. When I read his books when I was still living in Holland, I really liked what I was reading, but I couldn't get him. Because one book he's talking about, yeah, Tantra is the best. Taoism is the best. Oh, Jesus was the best teacher ever. Buddha was the best teacher ever. Sorry? Which one is it? I couldn't figure him out until I read his autobiography. I love it. Autobiography of a Spiritually Incorrect Mystic. I love it. He's so provocative and playful. And reading that book really helped me to understand him. And I think he was very enlightened. I remember Dalai Lama was once asked, what do you think of Osho? And Dalai Lama answers in his typical way, like, Osho, very, very enlightened. Crazy wisdom. Ha 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 ha. You could just imagine Dalai Lama saying this. Crazy wisdom. And boom, the light bulb went off in my head. Crazy wisdom is a Zen tradition where the master is always trying to trip up the mind of the student. First he says one thing, now this is true, you need to do this. And so the student really goes to work really hard. And then sometime later he goes, oh, forget about all that, do this, polar opposite. It's like, what? And by confusing the mind, the idea is to ultimately destroy the mind, where the ego gives up and falls away and you go beyond the mind. That's crazy wisdom. Now, Osho was doing this on a world stage. He was not just working with individuals, he was working really on collective consciousness. And at some point in the 60s he was talking about free sex, which is in India was a revolution, second chakra. Later he went on to America and was talking, mirroring. He was often mirroring and challenging, provoking people. 90-something Rolls Royces. And everybody was in an uproar. Power. He was joking. He was playing a game. Do you really think that he needed 90 Rolls Royces? Of course not. He was just playing a game, mirroring. He said it in an interview once. Years later, of course you can't say that while you're in the game. Years later, when he was back in India, somebody asked him, a journalist, and he said, do you really think that I need these Rolls Royces? But who got upset? The Americans. You've got so much wealth, why do you want so much wealth? Coming from the people from the most wealthy country on the planet. Beautiful mirror. So Osho, very enlightened, but crazy wisdom. Then you've got somebody like Ramana Maharishi, which he would come close, I think, to the idea that people have about an enlightened person, this perfect being. But, he wasn't doing very much. He was just sat there as the guru. Amazing, clear, pure consciousness, very, very pure. But also with a lot of humor, with a lot of playfulness. Think of somebody like Dalai Lama. So people say, is Dalai Lama enlightened or not? Well, what do you think? This is the 14th Dalai Lama, 14th reincarnation, where he gets all the best training the whole life long, all the secret teachings from Tibet. He practices Tibetan Tantra, he practices Tumo every day. He is so enlightened. He keeps coming back. It's something called Bodhisattva, where he keeps coming back to help humanity. And he's all about compassion, unconditional love. He is seen as a living deity, as a living Buddha. They say he's an emanation of Chenrezig in Tibetan, Avalokiteshvara, Sanskrit, or Kuan Yin. They're all names pointing to the same Buddhist deity, Buddha of compassion. You see it here, this picture, the 1,000 arms. It's Avalokiteshvara, Chenrezig, Kuan Yin. He's like a living emanation, and he's always talking about compassion, and we need to love each other. Somebody like Amma, the hugging saint from India, very similar energy, where just being in her presence to get that hug does something. She's emanating this. Then you've got somebody, and I always need to look at the name, Ananda Maji Ma. This is the Indian woman. She was discovered quite young. That name means the blissful-filled divine mother. She was known to be in the bliss state for prolonged periods of time, totally bliss, totally enlightened, very pure as well. So you see here that the enlightenment shows itself in different ways. with her Nanda Majima, total bliss. Dalai Lama, compassion. Amma, this motherly, unconditional love. Osho, crazy wisdom. Krishnamurti, hard truth, piercing insight, super wisdom. So there is not just the one thing that enlightenment is. If I were to get enlightenment, who knows what that would look like? If you get enlightenment, who knows how it would manifest in you? They're all aspects of a state. But what is in common is the freedom from the mind, freedom from the known, as Krishnamurti calls it. It's the end of suffering, where you've gone beyond the ordinary vision. Tantra teaches you to change your perception of life from ordinary vision to extraordinary, to bliss. Everything is bliss. And see the beauty in everything. So, I hope this was helpful. You don't have to get enlightened. What I do want to say is that you can totally function in enlightenment. Dalai Lama has got a very full schedule, teaching and traveling. You don't have to sit on the mountain like Ramana Maharshi did. Amma is very active. Krishnamurti was very active. Papaji is somebody I didn't mention before. He's the teacher of people like Muji. He was known as the enlightened householder. He was married, he was doing a normal job, and he was completely enlightened. And he even said that it's amazing how he could do that after the enlightenment happened for him, by being with Ramana Maharshi, actually. How he could perform all the tasks that he needed to do without thinking, and just all effortless, super effective. So don't think that if you go to enlightenment that you only sit in a cave. You can totally still function. Although maybe going through the process, there might be things. Eckhart Tolle went from total state of suffering, suicidal, to next morning waking up, boom, enlightened. And it was such a shock for him that he spent a year on a park bench in London. So somebody looking from the outside might think he's some kind of homeless person, some weirdo. Once he got through that phase, he then did lots of study. He studied Krishnamurti for half a year, making sense of everything that happened to him, getting a kind of structure, theoretical foundation for where he was. And you could say, with the greatest respect, you could say that his teaching is like a simplified version of Krishnamurti's teaching. He did an amazing job. And his insight, the power of the now, is phenomenal. But maybe sometimes you go through this phase where maybe you're not functioning properly. But maybe it's the most beautiful blessing. So, anyway, I could go on and on. I love this, as you can see. I hope this was helpful. Let me know in the comments. Do you want me to do a video on these masters and go into more detail in their life and their experiences? Would that be useful or not? Let me know in the comments. What do you think? Lots of love.